Hi everyone, I'm Daniel, and I want to talk about deck building. I like deck building. I like theory crafting cool interactions between cards and investigators and seeing a whole idea or two play out across a campaign. But I know a lot of you struggle with deck building. I hear a lot of, I don't know if this is going to be any good, or I'm disappointed by my deck. And I get it, it is a challenging part of the game that does have ramifications on the difficulty of an already tough game. So, I'd like to talk about some common deck building traps for new players, but also ones that I see overzealous experienced players fall into too. Now, this is definitely not a guide for making optimized decks that crush every scenario. Instead, it's a guide for making sure you're not too angry at your own deck for not doing what you wanted it to do. I think, as umbrella advice for what I'm going to talk about, I've learned that with a deck of 30 or more cards, it's super important to talk about consistency. Deck consistency definitely wins games. So, the more you can do to make your deck consistent, the better. Now, how exactly you do that depends. It depends on your role, your investigator, your card pool, on all kinds of things. But I think the following traps are still relevant no matter what, even if your solution to avoiding them may differ. So let's get into it. Okay, you're building your deck and you're looking across the card pool for some fun and neat interactions. Well, especially with a few expansions in hand, it turns out there's quite a lot of cool cards and possible interactions for your investigator. So one trap here is concocting a crazy Rube Goldberg machine where you need a huge chunk of your cards in play before you feel like you're effectively playing your deck idea. The thing is, in a lot of Arkham scenarios, especially the early campaigns, you won't get to complete your tableau for various reasons. For one, scenarios tend not to be too long, around 12 to 15 rounds, and without help, you won't draw enough cards in your deck to see everything. Instead of worrying about having enough slots to put everything into play, you'll have to come to terms with the fact that in some scenarios you'll be playing with some cards, in another scenario you'll be playing with some different ones, whichever one comes up first. Another reason relying on a complete tableau is tough is that the game is actively working against you. Enemies and treacheries keep you from just sitting around drawing cards and playing assets for the first several rounds. If a key card gets discarded from your hand or play area, you need a contingency. That brings us to deck consistency for your role. That is the density of cards that do the thing your deck needs to do. If you're taking on the majority of enemies your team will face, do you have enough weapons in your deck that you'll find one in your opening hand? What happens if you run out of ammo, charges, or your melee weapon gets discarded? If your deck is built around allies and you have charisma, are there enough allies in your deck to consistently make use of it? Now, the correct numbers are going to depend, obviously, but you can't go wrong with too many to begin with and then start to cut back. But redundancy in your deck is really important, and not just with the weapons. If I don't see, say, emergency cash early and I need resource generation, what else can I put in my deck that fulfills the same need? Maybe burning the Midnight Oil or Gregory Gry. This is also a good reminder to play multiple copies of all of your key components, especially at level 0. It's more likely that you'll see those cards. Having a lot of one-ofs is tempting. You want to try everything out, and it all looks good. But if a card is important enough in your deck to be included, you'll want to reliably find it, and doubling your chances by including 2 copies is great. Again, I'm not suggesting that you shouldn't play fun combo decks, but don't just assume that you'll find everything so easily. Assembling combos can be challenging without the right support. When it comes to spending experience, though, and getting higher level cards, 1 copy at a time is totally fine. Putting 1 copy of a 5 XP card in your deck is much better than waiting until somehow you have 10 XP to spend at once for 2 copies. And in many cases, you really don't need to even bother with getting that second copy. One more thing about spending XP, versatile. Versatile is a trap. I know. One of the hardest things about putting higher level cards in your deck is figuring out which one of your level 0 cards to cut to maintain your deck size. Well, what if you could have 5 more cards in your deck? I see some people adding this to their deck without even putting the one off-class card in. Well, the difference in being able to find your cards in a 30 card deck and a 35 card deck is huge. Your mulligans are going to be tougher, and you will notice your deck being more sluggish. Now, some investigators and classes can mitigate this with increased draw power, but you should be aware of that before purchasing Versatile. Anyways, in summary, try not to get distracted by all the cards and focus on just a few interactions that you want to pull off. Pick one or two archetypes that are the goal of your deck, and you can save the other cards for the next deck that you create. The next trap is focusing too much on certain card interactions and not thinking about the following categories enough when building a deck. The first one is movement, and it's probably the least important of the three I'm going to talk about, but don't sleep on cards that give you a free move or two. It's very easy to focus on including cards in your deck that account for action compression when dealing with enemies or getting clues. It is how you're completing the scenario's objectives, but let's put it this way, spending actions on movement stinks. And you need to move in every scenario, sometimes a lot, so getting some free movement can allow you to spend your actions doing what you're better at. This is especially true on the turns when you need your full 3 actions to dispatch an enemy or clear out a location of clues, but you're not in the right location yet. Surviving. The thing that you need to prevent most in this game is being taken out of a scenario early due to damage or horror from enemies or treacheries. Don't underestimate how much more smoothly the game goes when you can extend your health and sanity pools onto other cards. Most decks include allies, so you're already doing this, but 2 copies of one ally is not enough. Look at other items that can take damage or horror for you. Healing can also solve this problem, but especially at level 0, it is action inefficient. So think about getting cards like these to soak some of your damage and horror. The other way to solve the I can't find my cards problem is to devote a chunk of your deck to card draw or tutoring. Didn't find your key tome? Research Librarian is just another copy of it. And make sure you can pay for everything too. Cards that gain you resources seem pretty invisible once you zoom out and see how you want a scenario, but they're integral to making your deck work. Don't ever cut these cards when you upgrade unless you're generating resources in a different way. Again, cards that draw cards or gain resources certainly aren't flashy, but they'll improve your deck's consistency and keep you from wasting actions drawing a single card or gaining a single resource. Okay, number 3, not enough assets and events. I've read some advice that when building your deck, you should equally split your cards between assets, events, and skills. With some exceptions, I do not recommend this at all. Skills have the least impact in the game, and the designers agree. A rough search on ArkhamDB says that including investigator signatures, FFG has only printed 110 skills compared to 379 events and 647 assets. Look, assets and events are how you win since they provide the most action economy, and assets frequently give you the skill boost you need to pass tests anyway. Skill cards can have some nice effects, and they never cost an action to use, but for the most part, once they are used, they're gone, and you'll need card draw to support refilling your hand. Vicious Blow is an excellent card when you need just one more damage, but Beak Cop 2 is basically Vicious Blow on a stick, and also provides the skill boost for every other attack when you don't even need the extra damage. The other part about skills is that it makes your mulligan really, really difficult. You really want to start your game by playing a few assets, and the more skills that are in your deck, the more likely that you're going to spend turn 1 just drawing cards, and that's not ideal. I recommend about 4 to 6 skill cards in your deck, and definitely no more than 8 unless you have specific skill synergy in your deck. As far as events and assets go, I usually play between 12 and 16 assets, but can go up to 20 under specific circumstances, because hey, the numbers themselves matter much less than if your deck supports the overall plan. So before I get yelled at, let's talk about the exceptions when you should have more skills than I'm recommending here. So 1, if your deck has specific skill synergy like Winifred, Silas, Min, etc. If you're playing true solo, you generally don't have enough time to play too many assets, and cards that let you pass an evade test to shake off an enemy that just popped up before you were ready are really important. If you have a small card pool, the basic skills like Guts, Overpower, etc. are still very, very good cards in any deck, and when you don't have a large card pool, these will do more work than playing assets or events that don't make sense in your build. And then lastly, when your team has a soft spot, particularly in a skill like Evasion, Ideally, you're never voluntarily taking tests in skills you're not good at, but if no one on your team can pass a particular skill test, saving skill cards for these tests is good. Last, Netdecking. Here I'm talking about going to Arkham DB and grabbing a popular deck list that looks interesting and just playing as it is. Now, I have nothing against people posting their decks online for the community. It is a fantastic resource for everyone to use. The trap is that in Arkham Horror, pulling decks as is just off the shelf does not always work well for several reasons. First off, you need to carefully consider how well the deck fits into the team that you're playing with. A lot of deck lists are specifically geared towards solo or towards higher player counts, and might have several cards dealing with enemies when your deck needs to be all in on clues, or vice versa. An investigator's abilities and plans should mesh well with each other. If your deck wants to draw curse tokens for your spells, are other members of your team okay with adding curses in? Are they going to draw them instead of you? Your group really should have what people call Session Zero, where decks are shared and tweaked for team play. There's nothing worse than feeling like your deck isn't contributing to the campaign because your role is already covered by someone else, or if your team isn't doing well because everyone wants to fight enemies, but no one can get enough clues. Second, there can sometimes be a mismatch between a deck list and the campaign you're playing. It's tough to gauge this when you're playing a campaign for the first time, but every campaign asks you to push your deck building in a particular way. While most deck lists on Arkham DB are generic enough to work in most campaigns, it can be frustrating when you're following a particular recommended upgrade path when you really should be rolling with the punches your campaign is giving you. Third, as a new player, not every deck list on Arkham DB is easy to pilot. That is, knowing what to mulligan for, what order to play the cards in, that kind of thing. A lot of excellent decks are looking for a really cool interaction between some cards, and without having access to all these cards, or skillfully being able to pilot some combination, the deck just isn't going to work. Relatedly, there's a number of meme decks out there that are just trying to do something silly. Recently, I've seen a Leo Anderson equips 3 two-handed weapons at once deck, just for fun. I also feel like some decks are trying to exploit some combo to break the game wide open, and while new players may very well be able to pull this off, I don't think adopting these decks develops very healthy playstyles or deck building habits for new players. And that brings me to my last point. If you're just pulling decks off of Arkham DB and getting a little frustrated that they're not working out like they were advertised, you're also not really developing your own deck building skills. The best way to understand how a deck is supposed to function is to build it yourself. You'll have a pretty good idea of what's in your deck and which pieces you're looking for. Now, I get it, not everyone likes deck building at all, but it really is a key part of this game, and you should at least interact with it a bit. I do think that everyone should at least read deck lists and descriptions in Arkham DB and take some inspiration from them while making your own decks. Adapting decks from online to meet your team's needs is an excellent way to not fall into the traps I've mentioned here. And that's the end of my list. Hopefully this helps out some of you. Let me know in the comments below. I'm interested to see what you think and what other advice you might have for deck building. I'm planning on some more thorough guides on deck building in the future, but in the meantime, check out some of my other cool videos here on the channel. I have some great rules videos for new players, especially on enemy engagement, attacks of opportunity, and skill test timing that might interest you.